what is Blue Tengu for those of you who are just dropping by? Blue Tengu is a live game development show. It's not a tutorial. It's not watching a professional make a game. There are other people that do that on like YouTube and Twitch and stuff. This is more live development, just to kind of show you the process of someone who's making a game for the first time. I've made games before in teams and stuff, but never completely on my own. So kind of learning the ropes of how to do everything, and I hope that kind of inspires you guys to go out there and do it yourself, because if this guy can do it, you can do it. Software I'm using is Game Maker, along with whatever I have. I'm using Photoshop right now to do all my spriting, but you can do like create a graphic scale or GIMP if you want something free. I'm not as comfortable with those because I haven't used them, so I'm doing everything in Photoshop, but theoretically everything I do in Photoshop you should be able to do in those programs as well. So before the break I had a town graphic. I did make that town. Let's see. So like I had this town background that I made. I'm doing all the rough graphics now because I want to get a game working as fast as possible and not worry about what it looks like. And I just made a player based on the old like Commodore 64 sprite size. So it's kind of hard to see with that white background, but basically it's 21 pixels high by 24 across, not using all of the side pixels. Oh, okay. Yeah, Mito is going to be a lot easier for me to pronounce. So Mito from the chat mentioned that I was okay on pronunciation. So let's see, I've got my player, but I haven't actually put it in the game, so I'm going to jump over to Game Maker now. Actually, before I do that, my task list over on Trello right now I have in progress, making the player sprite, rough, I have those two town level things. I didn't want to move them to done yet because I'm not sure, compared to the player, if those are, even in the rough state, if they're done enough to do this properly. So I'm going to keep them there for now. And, when I first did this, I had all these tasks estimated at about half an hour a piece, and since this is like a 2-hour show with a bit of an intro and an ending, I figured 1.5 hours is about all I'd be able to get through. But I'm actually doing pretty well on time, so I obviously added way too much of a buffer into those things. So since I have another hour to go, I'm going to bring some of those things over. So the next thing, now that I have a player graphic, a rough player graphic, I need to put that into the game as well. Am I going to get the player movement? Those are giant tasks, getting the scripting, but what the heck? Let's see if I can get to it. But right now in progress, putting the player into the game. So jumping back to Game Maker here, I mentioned, in the first half of the episode that, the character graphics are going to go under sprites. So I'm going to create a sprite. And I'm going to use that player PNG that I drew and pop that in there. Don't have to worry about tiling or offsetting it or anything else. I'll go ahead and turn on precise collision checking, I think. We'll have to figure that out when bullets start flying, but I'll go for that. So now I've got this sprite up there. And like I mentioned before, sprite is just a graphic, so the game doesn't really know what to do with it. It could probably move it around, but it's not going to know that this thing can get hit by bullets or shoot things, or it can move with keyboard input or any of that stuff. So to do that, I'm going to need to make an object, a player object. So I'm going to call this the player, and Game Maker has everything really convenient in GUI, so bring that sprite over. Don't think I want to do any of this stuff yet. I may need to later. So I have an object player, and before I created this town room with that background I have, and I do have a player object, and it's selected, so I should just be able to add it with clicking. There we go. Can I move it around with the arrow keys or anything else? Snap, scroll, copy selection, scroll, backgrounds. Let's see. Oh, I don't want to do that. Yeah, I'm sure there's a way to move this character into a specific starting spot, but I'm not going to worry about that right now because that's not one of my tasks for today. But I will go ahead and confirm that. So right now I have, the basic room, which has like the dirt playing field that the character is going to be wandering around and shooting enemies on. I've got the buildings up at the top in the sky. Right now, I haven't defined any collisions or anything like that, so the character could just walk over the buildings or into the sky once he gets moving. But I will worry about that next, after getting the player moving. So, to get the player moving, I have to go over to Objects, and Game Maker works on these things called events. They're basically triggers. Everything's GUI based, which is one of the things that makes Game Maker, very easy to use, as long as you can remember what all the icons do. So to go over these events, create. When this object is first created, it runs whatever's in that event. Destroy, vice versa. When you get rid of the object, the things you run. Alarm is like if you want something to happen at a certain time. Step is every frame in the game. Usually it's 30 frames a second. Can be 60 if you're going high end, but each of those steps, every frame, it's going to run whatever's in this event. Collision is if it runs into another object and you've got collision on both of those, what happens then, it defines that. Keyboard, if you're doing anything on the keyboard, it defines that. Mouse, self-explanatory. Other is probably just, user-defined events and things like that. Draw, it's kind of like the step event, but I think every time it draws it, so it's probably the timing is different between that and step. Key press is like keyboard, but it only gets it when the key is first pressed down. Key release only gets it when the key is released. And asynchronous just runs while everything else runs. So to get this thing moving, I'm probably going to want to do just keyboard events. Actually, no, probably not, because if I put all of my movement into the keyboard event, what that means is the frame isn't going to matter. So if I'm, I think I did this before too, but if you're moving a character like left and you decide you want to move him up, if you use keyboard events, what'll happen is suddenly he'll stop, if you wanted to move him up into the left, suddenly he'll stop moving left and he'll just start moving up and things like that. And it's really hard to control, so I think it's actually a step event I want. And I would probably want to move him at the beginning of the step. We'll find out. That's part of why we're doing this. Learning experience. And, they've got all the different events that you can place in, or the actions, as Game Maker calls them, that you can place in here. If you're using a scripting language, these are usually like the functions and things like that, but, Game Maker makes everything easy by putting it all in the GUI. So, let's see, move fixed, move free, move towards, speed. It's kind of counterintuitive, but I think to get the character moving, I'm not going to want to actually use the move stuff. I'm going to want to use the speed stuff. Because if I'm holding down left at the beginning of the frame, I'm going to want the character to be moving a certain speed left. And if I decide to push up at the same time, I'm going to want to keep that left speed while I'm going up. So I'm probably going to want to use these. Actually, no, what am I doing? Begin step, keyboard. I probably am going to need a keyboard event. Left. And set the horizontal speed if he's going left. I'm not sure exactly how Game Maker's coordinate system works, so I'm going to have to, if it's all backwards, then I'm going to have to switch these around, but I would imagine that left is, well, let's say the camera's mirroring me, so left is going to move him minus. Right is probably going to move him in a positive direction. keyboard up. It's probably, let's see, minus, I would imagine minus in the y-axis, and down probably is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, going down. I'm just going to see what this does. It's probably not what I want to do, though. In fact, I can almost guarantee it's going to be weird, but let's just show what it does. I do have a room and I do have an object in it, so I should be able to just hit play and get this thing going. Yeah, easy enough. You got the player moving. Now you see, why I was thinking about the frame steps. But I'm actually not as far off as I thought I was. So I'm actually doing this the right way. I just need to add something in the frame step to basically stop him from moving. So when I push up on the keyboard, it changes its velocity to up, down on the keyboard down, right changes its speed to the right, left changes it to the left. So I got all of those pluses and minuses right. We just need to stop this guy from moving. So let's go back to player. Let's add that beginning step. Probably the beginning step is where I want to do it, because I think the way GameMaker does the events, you've got like those 3 steps. You have step, begin step, and end step. I think begin step, as the name says, it's like going to be the very first thing, like when the step, the frame basically, when it first starts, that's going to be what it runs. And I think all of those keyboard events probably come between begin step and step. So if, for example, I stop the player moving on step or in step, then what's going to happen is no matter what I push, basically that stop the player thing is going to overwrite that. So I'm going to want to stop the player at the beginning. So I want to add something where I change his horizontal speed to 0, and I want to change his vertical speed to 0. So what this should do is when the frame first starts, whatever he was moving in that direction, like when you saw just now when he was kind of floating along, it should stop that. And then the next thing it should do is take that left, up, right, down, whatever keys I'm holding down, and determine the speed from that. It's actually, once you get used to the system, it's fine, but it's kind of counterintuitive because, your first instinct would probably be, once you push left on the keyboard, you move him left or whatever. But the problem with these movement things is that they're fixed. So you can only, if you push down on the keyboard, it moves him, a fixed speed or left or whatever, and it's really hard to combine those things. So you want to work in velocities, which are these like speeds, like vertical speed and horizontal speed. So there we go. Now he's not moving. I move right. I'm just tapping the key right. He's moving right. Tapping the key left. He's moving left. Tap up, moving up. Tap down, moving down. If I hold right, he moves right and stops when I let go. And if I hold up and right at the same time, he moves up and right at the same time. It's actually, starting to look like a video game. A really bad video game, but it's starting to look like a video game. And like I said, there's no collision on anything, so he can go wherever he wants. I think he can even go off the screen. Yep. So those are things we're going to have to work on later. But, for now he's moving. Size-wise, like I mentioned, I'm going to be doubling the screen. So I'm going to be doubling the size of everything later. But I'm just going to think in terms of like, ratios for now. So is this enough of a playing field for there to be all the things I want on it? Yeah. If the player is this big, is there enough room for bullets to be, whizzing around the screen? Or is there enough room for enemies to be coming onto the screen and things to be happening? Yeah, it looks about right. It's actually not too bad. If I've got a bullet pinging around the screen, then it should be fine. He should be able to dodge it, when you push a button or whatever. And there should be room for enemies and enough room for dodging and stuff. So I think, the player size is fine. Playing field size is probably fine. in terms of, you know, the actual movement, this is pretty bad because, yeah, speed-wise, not too happy with the speed, whether it should go faster or slower. It's kind of hard to tell until, you know, you actually have a bullet coming for you. So that's probably the next thing we should do. I think it's even the next on the task list is just to make a bullet. So, oops, don't need that open. So I'll save that for now and go back and make a bullet. Check my task list. Alright, for now I think I'm going to clear all those in-progress tasks and put them into done. You know, I do have a town level background image, you know, a rough one. I do have the town level in the game. And let's see, do I have a task for adding collision to that town level? I'm going to need to add that actually. Wasn't something I was thinking about in the planning stages, but obviously, you know, I can't let the player just walk over buildings and everything else. Since I don't know exactly how to do that in GameMaker yet, I'm just going to make that a half-hour task. It's probably just a matter of looking it up on Google and doing whatever with it. And that's a pretty important task, so I'm going to move it to the top. And I'm going to bring in doing the rough bullet. And let's see. I've got 30 minutes left. The bullet's not going to take more than a few minutes. Probably 15 minutes is way too overestimated. So I'm going to at least get started on the action, the shooting aspect of it. And probably next week, you know, when I have to start laying down collision and things like that. Yeah. Alright. So I've got my player size now. Let's figure out how big I want this bullet to be. One of the things I want to do in the game is every time the bullet bounces off one of those like pinball style bumper objects, I'm going to want to make, you know, give the player a visual clue that this bullet has been bouncing. So, you know, I'm going to probably need to put sound cues in there, but, you know, in a video game the most important information is usually visual. So I'm going to need to change the color of the bullets as they bounce around, you know. I'll probably be speeding them up too every time they bounce off a bumper. So, you know, it starts out slow, hits a bumper, gets a little faster, a little faster, a little faster, a little faster. And I mentioned last week, you know, I kind of want a unique scoring system where the more that bullet bounces around before it hits something, the higher the score bonus you get from it. The risk, of course, is that you can hit yourself with your own bullets. So you have to be careful about, you know, that shooting stuff. So I want a bullet where I can actually change the colors, and I want a bullet that's going to look like a bullet, obviously, so it's going to be, you know, somewhat rounded. And in terms of how big it is compared to the player, that's probably something that can only be really determined once we get into gameplay. But I'm going to assume that a bullet is going to be smaller than his head, obviously. But I don't want just a single pixel, because that's going to be really hard to track on the screen. So and keeping with the old Commodore convention, you know, even though it's wasted space, I'm going to make it 24 pixels wide by 21 pixels high, pretending it's a sprite. And I'm going to lay it down here, right in the middle. Actually, I want to get rid of that background first. That was the mistake I made last time. And especially like once I start getting color changes and animations and stuff in here, having layers is going to be a lifesaver, so I'll just get that started right off the bat. Kind of hard to tell what the middle is. 24 wide, so 12 on each side. And then if this is 4, I'm going to need 10 pixels before the bullets. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, that's fine. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, because it's an odd number height, so that's fine for the bullet. And I'm using my Commodore palette, so I want to make sure that I'm using the Commodore color. It's going to run out of colors in terms of bullets real quick. I can't use yellow, obviously, because that's the color of the dirt I have going. I can't use brown because that's the color of the little splotches in the dirt, so it'll get lost pretty easily, so I just have to use one of the other colors. So I'm going to go with gray. It's kind of a boring bullet color, but at least it'll be easy to see. So, and I have anti-aliasing turned off. This is one thing if you're doing pixel art in Photoshop, you got to make sure this is turned off, because if you leave it on, what happens is you get, well, I guess with the pencil it's not too bad. It doesn't matter. But if you're using like a brush, or you're using like one of those rounded brushes, what it'll do is it'll try to help you by, you know, having like these semi-transparent pixels around to kind of smooth it out. You want that off. So let's see. Yeah, this brush doesn't even have that in it. So let me turn that off there so I don't accidentally use it again. Alright, well that's fun for a rough bullet, I think. Is it worth having something that can decide the direction? Yeah, probably not, because it would be able to move in like diagonals and stuff, so it's going to be really hard to make that look right. Probably it's enough for the player to see just an object moving around the screen, so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to save out the PNG. One thing about this, usually if you're making a game with a lot of sprites or a lot of graphics, you're going to want to make a sprite sheet, and basically what that means is, you know, packing all of that stuff into a small single file, because like, look at this, you know, I've got a 24 by 21 graphic and I'm only using this tiny little bit of it. You know, if I did this for every single one of those bullets with the different colors and stuff, you know, on a PC it's probably not going to matter for like a 2D game like this, because, you know, you have all the memory you could use, you have all the hard drive space you can use, plenty of processing power, especially for something that's not doing any rendering or shading or whatever. But if you start moving over into portable platforms like iPhone and things like that, you know, maybe you have to start worrying about memory limits and everything else. And of course, you know, be nice to the people who have their iPhones. Don't take up all their hard drive space and all that. So, you know, sprite sheets are worth doing, but for now I'm just doing the rough to test out the gameplay, so this is fine for what I'm doing. So now that I've got the bullet, I'm going to add it into the game as a sprite first. Yep, there it is. I'm going to do precise collision checking. I think that's what I'm going to want to do, but I may have to check that off later. Let me rename this sprite so I know what it is later. Oh, okay, well, GameMaker doesn't like that, so I'll just come up with a naming convention so things don't overlap, since I'm going to have a bullet object later too. Okay, so bullet, and I'll make that sprite bullet, and okay. So now I have a bullet object, but, you know, obviously if I go to the room, there's no bullet in here, and I don't want to just add a bullet in here, because it would just sit there. So, to do this properly, I'm going to need to tie this bullet into what the player does, which means I'm going to have to modify the player object. So right now, all the player can do is move, but I'm probably going to want to be able to have him able to shoot. So, let's see, that wouldn't be a movement. It's not paths or steps or anything like that. Maybe it's in one of these other tabs. That's probably what I want. Create instance. create moving. That sounds even better. Let's try that first. That's probably what I want to do. So, we're going to want a keyboard event. How should we go about this? This is going to get complicated in a bit because obviously we don't want to have the player just able to hold down the keyboard and have just a stream of bullets come out, because that's going to be really weird. So what we're going to need to do is have some kind of timer that, a keyboard press, or whatever we make the fire button, we're going to want to have some sort of pause in there so that they can't just hold down the key and fire as much as they want. But for now, I'm just going to have a keyboard event. And whether you choose keyboard or whether you choose key press is going to be the thing that's going to determine that, is whether you want to have it so that the player, for example, if you use the control key to shoot, if the player holds down the control key, do you want them to keep firing? Or do you want to have them press the control key every time they want to fire? A lot of shooters, what they'll do is they'll have both. And what they'll do is, if you're just holding it down, you fire off at a steady pace. But if you're actually wailing on the button, you fire faster, to kind of reward the player for not just sitting there holding the button. May do that in this game. But for now, I don't want to inconvenience the player too much, so as long as they have the control key or whatever I use held down, fire bullets. So, control's right there. Actually, let's make it the space. No, let's make it the control, because I think I'm going to want to use space for something else later, the dodging. So, control. What I want to do is create an object that is moving. Now, this is going to be tricky as well, because I want to create a bullet that fires based on where the player is facing. Now, what that means is I'm going to have to add a lot of tricky logic in here that keeps track of where the player is facing. So if the player hits right on the keyboard, I need to say that he's facing right. If they've hit up and right, I need to know that they're facing up and to the right so that they fire at a diagonal. All that sort of stuff. Yep. That's going to be interesting. But, alright, the basic, actually I shouldn't use it moving. Let's not create a moving one, let's just create an object. Now why I'm going to do that is so that I can keep track of that facing thing, because I think if I do create a moving object, what it's going to do is, no matter what I try to do to it, it's always going to fire in that direction. But if I just create an instance of an object, and then use the direction the character is facing to determine from there where it moves, I should be okay. So that creates the object itself. And let's see, this is probably where I'm going to want to add a variable somewhere. Oh good, they have a variable thing in here. So this is where we're going to use another event. Oh, Mito in the chat. Yeah, it is kind of relaxing. Mito says, you can't imagine how perfect it is to code while you watch someone else code. Yeah, I do the same thing all the time myself. It's kind of relaxing, especially if the other person's having more trouble than you, which I'm probably having more trouble than you, I'm sure. It's relaxing because, I don't know, it feels like you have a compadre or something going in it. So I do that all the time at work, watching other people code and listen to them code and listen to their process and stuff. So let's see, add event. I want to add a create event. This is when the player object's first created. I'm going to want to set a variable. Yep, okay, just a regular variable. I'm going to want to create a variable that keeps track of his direction. So I'm going to call that PL direction. And right now, when the player's first made, he's not going to have a direction, so it's going to be 0. And that only happens once when the player's made, so that's fine. At the beginning of every step, since I'm setting the horizontal speed to 0 and the vertical speed to 0, actually it's going to get kind of tricky. Because if I reset the variable to 0 here, then whenever the player stops, the bullet's not going to have a direction to work with. So the player's always going to need a direction, because otherwise it's basically the player committing suicide. He's basically shooting where he is and the bullet doesn't move. So I'm going to need to always have a direction that's not 0. So actually in that creation step, I'm going to need a default there as well. So let's see, how should I do this? I should actually write this down so I remember it later. To make these variables make sense in terms of direction, I'm going to need to assign like 0, 1, 2, 3, like a clock or something. I'm going to have 8 directions because you can shoot up, up to the right, etc. So I'm going to make 0 up, 1 up to the right, 2 to the right, 3 to the lower right, 4 down, 5 lower left, 6 left, 7 up left for now. You know, whether this is going to serve me or not, I don't know, but when I start the game, the player is going to be facing down, so the safe direction to start with, if the player doesn't move before they shoot, it should just be down. At the begin step, I'm not going to want to touch that variable because it's going to want to keep track of the last direction they moved. I think this is going to be trickier than I thought it was, because if the player is moving left and up at the same time, I'm going to need to know that. Okay, I'm going to create a lot of variables just to make my life easier. I'm going to create a lot of variables. Up. This may not be the way I end up doing it, but I think it's the way I have to do it for now. Do I need up and down? Probably don't need that much. So set variable to 1, let's call that player face up. So PL face up. Oh, okay. Mito's mentioned that he's, you know, the guy that mentioned that he's coding while watching me code. He's trying to code a game server, so yeah, okay, that's that's definitely more of a struggle. It's probably kind of relaxing to see this because you probably just jump in and fix these problems. So I'm glad I don't have that problem yet. Getting a player moving is probably a very easy task compared to that. So I've got a variable player face up. If it's 1, that means he's facing up. If it's 0, he's facing down. I'll also create, and since he starts down, I'm going to keep that at 0. I'm also going to do a player face left, and as you can guess, if that's 0, he's facing right. True, false, basically. If it's 1, he's facing left. Well, okay. Now we've got another problem. He may not be facing left or right, so I'm going to need 3 actually. So center I'll make 2. And the same thing for this up and down. If it's up, it's 1. If it's down, it's 0. If it's middle, it's 2. Those numbers are probably confusing. let's keep it more logical, because it's going to get me into trouble later if I start trying to figure out what was 2 again, what was 1 again. So I'm going to call this player face vertical, and I'm going to make up 0, you know, based on game maker logic, you know, minus is up, positive is down, as we just saw, so I'm going to make up the smallest number. You know what? Even easier. Up is -1. Center is 0. Down is 1. If it's up, it's minus. If it's centered, it's 0. If it's down, it's 1. And since he's facing down in the beginning, I'm going to make that 1. And I'm going to change the name of that to player. Oops, why am I calling this place? Player face horizontal. And I'm going to make, because of Game Maker, where left, the further you go left, you go minus in the minus direction. So I'm going to make left -1, no particular direction 0, and right 1. So since he's not facing any left or right direction in the beginning, I'm going to keep this at 0. And okay, I have the name right on that one. So I've got player face vertical and player face horizontal. Left is -1, center is 0, right is 1. And just so I can keep track of that when doing logic stuff. And let's see, I might still need that. Maybe not, but I'll keep it for now. But for now I'm going to work with player face vertical and player face horizontal. 0 means he's facing the center, 1 means he's facing down, so that's a good place to start. Now when he creates the bullet, I wonder if these variables can go outside of the object that they're created in. Yeah, I'm not sure if these variables over here are going to be global or if they're going to be local things. Let's test that out, because the ideal solution would probably be to do that in the bullet object, you know, determine direction, because it's not really the player direction or the player that matters. Once that bullet is created, it's like the player and the bullet are 2 separate things. So I don't probably want to have a bunch of stuff affecting the bullet after it's created from within the player, because then you have to keep jumping back and forth to make changes. So I'm going to see what happens. So right now, all the player's responsible for is creating the bullet when you hit control. And I'll worry about timers and stuff later, because thankfully I'm the only one that has to play this for now. Now I'm going to go into the bullet logic, and I'm going to add a create event. Now we're going to find out whether or not it can see the player variables that I created. Oops, I want to set a variable. What I want to do is have some logic in here. Okay, Game Maker keeps all of those like ifs and else and loops and stuff like that in the control tab. So I'm going to want to have check empty, check collision, maybe this, question mark, test expression, that's probably what I want. Yep. Okay, so what this question mark thing should do is it should test this may be what I want. Apply to an object player, and the expression is probably what I want to test. So let's see. Those variables I created were player face vertical. If an expression is true. No, that's not what I want. That's just true and false. I want something that can test the variable itself and the value. Oh, well, there's a test variable thing. Okay, duh. Alright. And I want to test that player variable, player face vertical first. Let's start with -1. If the player is facing up, and I think what these arrows do are they kind of block it off. So yeah, okay, there we go, start of a block. So if the player is facing up, then that gives me one bit of information, but I still need another bit of information to determine where this bullet's going to start flying. And that is horizontal. So the possibilities there are -1. I wonder if I can copy this stuff. Brilliant. Ah, no. Not quite brilliant. Yeah, okay. No, I'm not sure why that didn't work. Should have just copied it to the end rather than in the middle. Face horizontal is equal to 0, which is the other possibility that it's in the middle. That's another condition. There's obviously better ways to do this, probably using math and everything else, but I'm just doing the most logically, you see it, you know exactly what's going on way of doing it, which is not very efficient, but I'm not worried about efficiency now. Okay, so those are the three conditions. If he's facing up, he can be facing up and to the left, just up, or up and to the right. So that's that. So those are all my up conditions. Now, I want to create a down condition. So, if player face vertical is 0, that means he's not facing up or down. And I'm sure some of you who are watching are considering the problem I would run into if I wasn't thinking about it right now, which is, what if he isn't facing up or down or left or right? Does the bullet just end up, shooting him? Does he end up shooting himself? I have to create defaults for that, but I will worry about that next. Face horizontal. So again, I have to do the left, middle, and right thing. It's rather confusing that I did that end of block thing at the beginning, so let's not do that again. Player face horizontal 0. And player face horizontal 1 if he's facing right. And the last condition, I'm not sure if there's else logic in this. Yeah, there is else logic in here, but I'm not going to worry about efficiency for now. I'm just going to do things the obvious way, which is just to do if every time. It's not very efficient, but I don't think this game is going to destroy my computer if it's a little inefficient anyway, so I'm going to favor legibility in favor of efficiency. So I want the last vertical state, which is facing down, which is 1. Get that started. And, whoops, I was using set variables. I need to change that. So player face horizontal if he's facing left. What do I do with the bullet if he's doing that? If the player is facing down and to the middle, which is what it'll be in the very beginning, and I want to fire the bullet down. Player face horizontal. If he's facing down to the right, that's my final condition. And finish off that vertical thing. So I was using a bunch of set variables. That's very bad. Let me fix those real quick, because otherwise this thing's gonna go crazy. about that. Those icons look so similar. Wasn't even thinking. And hopefully before my 2 hours is up, I'll be able to show you the bullet actually coming out of this. Even if I don't get it quite right. Do I have anything? No, there's another set in there. Player face horizontal. 0. Okay. And I have a few more of those set mistakes down here. Player face horizontal, and this one has to be 1. Get rid of that. Yeesh. I was getting awfully variable set happy there. Even did one of the vertical ones that way. Facing down. Okay, I think the rest are all ifs, so let's check this. If he's facing up and to the left, and to the middle, and to the right. If he's facing the middle, and to the left, and the middle, and the right. He's facing down, to the left, to the middle, to the right. Okay. So rather than code out all of these, I'm just going to get started with the very basic, he's not facing left or right, and he's facing down, which is the start condition, just to see if I can get a bullet moving. And I think that's where I will stop today. So for that, the vertical, as I said before, -1 is up, 0 is the middle, 1 is down. So I want to do the condition if player face vertical is equal to 1. He's not facing left or right, so all my action is going to go in here. So I'm going to set the vertical speed here to, let's say, 0, 1, 2, 3, 1 is going down. I want to make the bullet faster than that player was going, so I'm just going to try 2 for now. And just to cover all my bases, I'm going to also set the horizontal speed to 0. I mean, you don't really have to do that, because if it's already 0, then there's no point in setting it to 0. But just to make it even that much clearer. So I should have a bullet that once it comes into existence with this create event, it'll check the player, that variable, where it's facing, and move accordingly. Obviously, where the bullet starts is a problem. Okay, that is a problem. Yep. The bullet does need to start somewhere. Let's see, where can I do that? Jump? Jump to position. That sounds like exactly what I want. Applies to self. There's got to be a way to do this so that that X and Y. I wonder, there must be a variable that keeps track of where the player is in the game. But for now, since I just want to test if this responds to the control correctly, I'm just going to start it in the middle of the screen, not necessarily where the player is. Since my screen is 320 by 240, I'm going to go 160 by 120. That should be the middle. So when it's created, it'll jump just to the middle of the screen regardless of where the player is. So it's not going to look like the player's shooting the bullet. It's just the player's direction is going to affect how the bullet moves. And that was a lot of steps without testing, so I'm sure crazy things are going to happen when I try this. Unforeseen things. Check the compile window. Alright, well, we're off to a great start there. What did I not do right? Error. Object player key left. Unexpected symbol. Okay, I must have started something here and not done it properly. Which one? Key left. Oh, yeah, I left that. That's a bunch of junk I left behind. Thankfully, it was an easy error to fix. That would have been a great way to end the show, just me debugging stuff. So when I hit the control key, theoretically, a bullet should appear in the middle of the screen and start moving down. Nope. Player face vertical. Do I not have access to that? Is that the way this is going? Is that the problem? Player face vertical 1, so maybe these variables can't be accessed from other variables. That doesn't make much sense because GameMaker doesn't really seem to have global variable concept as far as I can tell, right? So it should be able to read this. Player PL face vertical 1 when the player is created. Create an instance of object bullet. If PL face vertical, do I have all these things spelled right? Yeah. Is equal to 1, 0. Oh, well, that's one problem anyway. I didn't end the block. Okay, well, that's a problem. Oops. That might be just the only problem. Did that fix it? I didn't, with the start and stops, I must have missed one of the nestings. Hopefully that's all I need. Start of a block. Alright, well, let's try it. Hopefully that's all that was wrong. Nope, that is not all that was wrong. So, just to try this out, I'm going to just create a variable here. And I'm going to create player face horizontal 0. And I think I know exactly what's wrong actually before I come up with that kind of half solution to doing this. I think I know what I did wrong. Probably all of these things need to be set to object player, and I probably missed one. Yep, that's what it was. That's why I couldn't find that variable. Because when I was going back and fixing those variables from ifs to from sets to ifs, I mean, I didn't actually change the object, so it was looking for a variable inside of the bullet object, and obviously there was no player face, horizontal or vertical, inside the bullet object itself, which is why it had a problem. So, hopefully this does it. Once I get all of these set. The most important one was that one and the one above it. That one was set properly. I guess I got the last one right. Okay. Okie dokie. Action number 26. At least it's kind of happening partway through. Action number 26, this one. I just missed setting it. There we go. Okay. Let's see. Let me catch up to the chat here after that crazy debugging session. Squirrel Gray mentions, if ever in GameMaker, a global variable is a variable that can be used by any object in the game. Global variables follow the same rules for naming as other variables, except for one major difference. They're prefixed with global. Thank you. Okay, so that is the way I will do global variables. I'll write that down. Thank you for that, Squirrel Gray. So if I do want a global variable at some point, I will prefix it with global. So I think things like maybe score and stuff like that. Probably global score, global high score, things like that. For the player direction, it worked out in the end. The player direction is obviously something that's related to the player, so it makes more sense to keep that in the player object. So I'll keep that as it is now, since it is working. As I said, the bullet object appears in the middle of the screen and goes down whenever I hit control. And obviously, since I don't have timers or anything like that in place, I can just keep doing this forever. And I can even hold it down and create a standard stream. That's what we're going to fix next week. But for now, I did get a little bit ahead of schedule at least. So jumping back, let me save this before things happen. And let me close this. And jump back to my task list. So I did create a bullet sprite rough. I do have the character moving around. It's rough. So I'm going to want to probably polish that up later, but at least the task of getting the character moving around on the screen is done. Well, let's see. Obviously, I put him in the game. Obviously, I created the rough sprite because it doesn't look that great. The bullet's even rougher because it's just a gray square. But that is in there. And I'm going to leave that player action shoot scripting task there because all I need to do is do what I did for facing down for all of the other directions, and I also actually have to have the bullet come from the player. Well, not the center of the player, but probably a bit of an offset from the player. So yeah, that's probably not going to take an hour, but as you see things come up, I'll probably have to debug it a little bit, tweak it a little bit, so I'm going to leave that in an hour. And I'm going to change this to episode 3. So that'll be next week. I'm doing this in 2-hour chunks. So next week that'll take about an hour. And yeah, I do want to create collision next in that town level so the bullet actually stops, the player actually stops. That's an hour and a half worth of tasks since it's a 2-hour show with a little bit of stuff in the front and back and a break in the middle. Theoretically, if my estimations are correct, that's about how long it'll take to get through this stuff. Squirrel Gray, congrats on getting the bullet. Thank you. Oh man, it's nice to have to debug even the easy stuff. I'm sure I'm going to have lots of fun with things as they come up later, especially like the bumpers and the way the bullets are bouncing off and stuff. Yeah, stick with me. There'll be lots of debugging and me going crazy, but thanks to you guys in the chat. I want to thank Mito, and I want to thank Squirrel Gray for coming up in the chat and giving me some advice and some pointers. Definitely appreciated. So let's turn off the desktop there. So this week what we did, last week we did planning. Episode 1 was planning. You can go to youtube.com Blue Tengu Studio and see that episode if you want. It's probably also in the archive and the Twitch TV channel if you want to see it that way. I'll be putting this episode up on YouTube probably, if I'm fast enough with it, I'll get it up by tonight. Well, I'm in Japan, so my tonight is, if you're in America, your tomorrow morning. If you're in the UK, probably your night as well. Kind of hard to tell with the time zone stuff. But it'll be my tonight, so another 12 hours or so. If I don't make that, it'll be my tomorrow morning, so within 24 hours it'll be up on YouTube, this episode. For those of you who watched from the beginning, it's the same thing, so you don't need to go and see it. But if you do want to kind of catch up on stuff I did earlier, or if you want to catch up on the first episode, go to youtube.com Blue Tengu Studio. The main site is www.bluetengu.com. You can stop by. We post episodes and stuff there, as well as other posts. If you want to follow us on Twitter, know when we're doing this again. That Twitter handle is btengu. And for those of you who are seeing this on YouTube, if you want to stop by the Twitch, we do this Japan time, 8 a.m. every Saturday morning from 8 to 10. Go a little overtime, obviously, because things don't always go as planned, but roughly 2 hours. So it starts at 8 a.m., ends around 10 a.m. every week. For those of you in the States, that's daylight savings time, so 4 p.m. Pacific. 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 Central, 7 Eastern. For those of you in the UK, that start time is going to be midnight. Oh yeah, for those States times, that's 4 p.m. Friday, 5 p.m. Friday, 6 p.m. Friday, 7 p.m. Friday. For the UK, that's midnight between Friday and Saturday. For those of you who are here in Japan with me, that's 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Western Australia, I think also with daylight savings time as it is now, is probably 8 a.m. as well, same start time. If you're in Central Australia, I believe with daylight savings time it's 9:30. I think it's 10 if you're Eastern, and if you're in New Zealand, it's noon on Saturday. So if you're watching this from YouTube, or if you want to catch us again next week, that's when we do this. All that information is on our site, www.bluetengu.com. It's also probably down at the bottom there in Twitch under the information with the schedule. Thank you for joining me, and Mito says it was an honor being here. Thanks for sticking with me. I mean, you were here, I think, from the beginning, so thank you very much, both of you guys, and everyone who's watching. Thank you to you guys who are watching later on YouTube. Leave a comment if you have any questions about what came up. You can send that, just do an @btengu to send it to me on Twitter. Leave a comment on the site. Send me a private message in Twitch. Leave a comment on YouTube. However you can reach me, that's fine. If you don't like doing something in public and you want to just ask a private question, or you're not confident in asking a question, just send an email to contact@bluetengu.com. It's easier to respond to stuff publicly because other people probably have the same questions and I'll notice it faster, but I'm happy to respond to things in email because obviously the show's just getting started, so it's not like I'm flooded with email or anything. I can probably respond to everything right off the bat. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you next week, hopefully. Hope you got something out of this. If anything, I hope you just had a relaxing little background noise while you were doing other things. We'll keep going with this next week. Thank you for watching, and I will see you later.